Therefore, since we have been made right in God's sight by faith, somebody say, made right, we have peace with God because of what Jesus Christ our Lord has done for us. Shout amen. There's a story told that a family traveled to Kenya, and they wanted to visit that beautiful land, and they wanted to do a huge safari. So they set up the trip, and when they got there, they hit the ground running. So the first day, they actually acquired some native tour guides, and they hit the ground running. The first day, from morning to evening, they were moving. Only stopped long enough to eat and sleep. Second day, same thing. From morning to evening, they were moving. Only stopped long enough to eat and sleep. The third day, the family got up, but the tour guides refused to go. They sat down by a tree. And so the family sought to be respectful, but as it got closer to 11 o'clock, the father just got so upset, and so he said to his translator, find out from them, what are they waiting on? So they said back to the translator, to the father and to the family, or rather the translator said, they said to tell you that they're waiting for their souls to catch up with their bodies. I thought that was a great picture of what it means to live life without margin, to live life in such a way that you don't have breathing room. In this hustle and bustle, fast-paced, high productivity, high performance world, it is very easy for us to feel like we've run off and left our souls. And now the big idea for this message is that to live a life without margin is, in fact, to live in the danger zone. The flip side of that big ideal is that God invites all of us and desires that all of us would live lives of deep joy and high quality. The fact of the matter is that for many of us, some of us, we have large paychecks and large homes and large offices and large influence. But our physiology is telling us that we're living life without margin, without any space, because we wake up with headaches, and we have acid reflux, and we have high blood pressure, and we have irritable bowel syndromes. Our physiology is saying you need more margin, you need more space in your life. And our psychology is telling us that we need to slow it down a little bit. We need more margin, more space, that we're not really fully getting the deep joy that God anticipates or wants us to have, because, we're finding ourselves waking up depressed and wanting to quit and wanting to leave and exit and abandon the job and abandon the family. We haven't said this to anybody. We're keeping a lot of this to ourselves, but this is how we're feeling, some of us. And we're having reoccurring nightmares. And for some of us, we just can't sleep. Our physiology is telling us you're running too fast. You don't have enough margin. Our spirituality, we feel empty. We feel like that proverbial mouse that's on the wheel, and we're turning it, and many of us feel like we're living our lives. It's like on the wheel, but we're not going anywhere. We don't feel like there's any purpose. The insanity that comes out of that causes us to make some pretty poor choices sometimes. We call that midlife crisis for some guys. It's dangerous to live life without margin. Last week I gave you an assignment. I suggested that you would take 10 minutes 3 times during the course of the day, schedule it in the morning, the noon, and the afternoon. You'd read 4 chapters in the book of John, and that you'd do that every week of this series. And I'm not going to ask for a show of hands of who did it. I'm just going to assume, because you guys are desperate to live lives of margin, that you all did it. One of our partners told me a few days ago that around Monday evening, in the evening time, he was so ramped up, and he hadn't been sleeping well for almost a week. He remembered this assignment that I gave him, and so he went and got the Bible, the Message translation of the Bible, and he read the 4 chapters in John. And he says, remarkably, as he said, he put on some music, dimmed the lights, sat down in his chair, and just him and God, and he just read. He says, as he got halfway through the reading, he noticed his whole environment changed. His anxiousness dropped. A sense of peace emerged. He said by the time he finished reading, he felt he was in a total different place. And he said he went and laid down, and for the very first time, he got a solid, sound, full night's sleep. You see, he allowed time for his, proverbially saying, his soul to catch up with his body. Analogies. Spend time with God. And so when I gave you that assignment, it was really about giving you a technique that trying to teach you to open up some spaces in your daily calendar, and to give you a way of kind of slowing the pace down, and to give you a way inside of those 10-minute blocks to actually begin to hear the rhythm that God has for your life. Because I believe, like a good dancer, and I'm not a good dancer, but if I was a good dancer, you would know it, because I could hear the rhythm. And see, good dancers, a lot of folk can hear rhythm, but they can't respond to it. And when I met my wife, I thought I could hear and respond to it, to her embarrassment. But good dancers are able to hear and respond to the rhythm. And I say God has a rhythm for each of your lives, and you just need to slow down enough to hear and respond. So last week I told you that one of the elements of God's rhythm for our lives is peace. Jesus said in John 14:22, he says, peace I leave with you. My peace, the peace that sustained Jesus when he was in high ministry. He says, it's that peace I give to you. So this is what I want to give you. And so peace is part of the rhythm. But there's another important element of the rhythm that I want to spend most of the time talking about today, and it is grace. Everybody shout grace. I want to spend a little time doing a little theology here today. I don't spend a lot, and I want to tie it to the practicality. And here's my point. I want you to get this point. I want you to get this point. Our relationship with God, how we are with God, is in many ways reflected in how we are with people. So theology matters. What we think about God and our interaction with God impacts how we think and interact with people. Shout grace. Grace. All right, let me give you a definition for grace. Let me give you 3 dimensions of a definition for grace. So first of all, grace is unearned favor that allows God, the unearned favor that makes me right with God. Say, makes me right. It gives me a relationship with God. It's unearned. I can't do it. I need God to initiate it. Unearned. Secondly, it's power. Shout power. Power to do with God what I cannot do on my own. Here's the third one, which really intersects with this notion of margin today. Everybody shout space. Watch this. It's space to make mistakes and grow. That not only does God give me a relationship with him, if in fact I want it, he initiates it. And not only does he give me the power to be and to do inside that relationship with him what I could never do on my own, but in addition to that, what a remarkable God is, God creates space in the relationship that I have with him, and he does it through what Jesus Christ has done on Calvary cross. He creates space for me to fail and make mistakes and get up and learn and grow. God gives me margin. It's grace. Now I want you to think about these two terms, and I want to give this guy credit because his name is Caesar Kalawowski. Wrote a book called Transformed, and really I kind of picked this concept from him, or at least from his writings, and I want you to think about these two formulations. Here's one. The first is a mentality. I call it a be to do mentality. That equals, or that means, it's what we talk about when we say, by grace am I saved. Salvation by grace. The other one, watch this, is a do to be mentality. That's what we call salvation by works. I have a better word for it, performance. Now, the Bible, contrary to how a lot of folk portray it, is really about inviting me into a relationship with Jesus that is defined by a be to do mentality. As a matter of fact, what makes me a Christian, a follower of Jesus, what makes me saved, what makes me safe in my relationship with Jesus is not that I don't curse folk out. Because there are plenty of folk who are not Christians who don't curse people out. And it's not that I don't get drunk on Saturday night, because there's plenty of folk who don't get drunk on Saturday night. Not that I don't run women. There's plenty of people who don't run women who are not Christians. See, that doesn't make me Christian. What makes me a Christian is that I actually surrender my life to this notion of be to do. That I believe that in Jesus Christ, God has declared me righteous, and that my sins have been handled on the cross, and that regardless of what happens in life, God's got me. So it's be, I am not just a sinner. Why? I am a sinner saved by grace, yes, but I am, he also declares, I'm a saint. He declares, I'm righteous. Come on now. And he says, that's who you are, so you ought to act like it, son. That's be to do. I already am, and I'm not trying to earn it. I'm not trying to prove it. I'm not trying to hold on to it. I am. Now, this is a theme that works its way through the biblical text. Let me just give you several examples so you can really get what I mean here. In Genesis chapter 3, you'll find this dialogue. It's an interesting dialogue between the serpent, which represents Satan, evil, and Adam and Eve. Here's what he says in verse 5 and 6 of chapter 3. He essentially says this. He says to Eve, he's talking to, he says this. He says, go ahead and eat of the fruit. Everybody say do. Because when you eat of the fruit, God knows that when you eat of the fruit, you will become, everybody say be, like God. So, do in order to become. Perform in order to earn. Now, what the serpent didn't help Adam and Eve to remember is that what they were trying to become, God had already declared they were. Somebody say identity. That's what I'm talking about, identity. Shout identity. All right. What are you talking about? Well, in chapter 1, that's in 3. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 and 27, when God makes humanity, this is what the verse declares. He essentially says, and God made them in his own image. That word image means he made us to reflect God. We were like God. And that whole chapter is about God creating creation and filling it until we get to verse 26. And then he says he made humanity in his image. And then he says to us, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. In other words, act like me. I've already given you an identity. See, you already be. So just go ahead and do. But Satan said, he flipped it. He said, no. You've got to perform in order to be. And it messed their lives up. And that is the insanity that drives us in a silicon culture world today. We still believe we have to perform in order to be. And so through performance, we are chasing our identity rather than living out a wonderful identity that God has already given us. But you get this concept, it totally changes how you perceive religion and faith and work and relationships, because a lot of us, we're doing this, we're performing to be lovable to our spouse, our girlfriends, our boyfriends. We're performing to be a great parent to our children. We are performing to be the person worthy of a promotion. We are performing to get straight A's, to get a 4.0 so we can graduate, so that we can get that great job. We are performing to be. And it drives the suicide rate. It drives the divorce rate. It drives the drinking rate. Because we're like that mouse on that wheel. Let's follow it through the biblical text. When you get to Genesis chapter 12, you have God and Abraham has a conversation. God says to Abraham, no merit of Abraham. Abraham didn't do anything to earn this. God just says, I decided it. I'm going to make you your father of many nations. Essentially, out of your seed will come many nations. And you will be shaped to be a blessing. You will be blessed to be a blessing. Abraham is 75 years old, Abram at the time. And well, fast forward to chapter 15. You get to chapter 15. Abram is now 90 years old. And he's been thinking, God has said that I'm going to have this powerful seed. And that my identity, I'm going to be a great nation. Identity. And my impact and all the nations through the world will be blessed by me. Impact. But after 25 years, between 75 and 90 years old, he's 90 years old, and he has a conversation, his first recorded conversation between God and Abram, and nothing has happened. And so here's Abraham saying to God, he says, God, I'm childless. How is this going to happen? Here's what Abraham is really saying. The word childless means I'm stripped. Here's his question. Verse 2, 3, 4, 5, chapter 15. Listen to what he says. This is the question. God, how can I be what I know I can't be? Here's the second question. And God, because you said, but I can't be that. Because I'm stripped. I don't have anything. And then God, how can I do what I know I can't do? Because you said I'm going to have an heir. But look, God, from 75 to 90, I've been trying to produce an heir. I've been doing and nothing. Somebody say amen. Get the point. Practical. And so what Abraham has concluded, I can't do it and I can't be it. God says, I got you just where I want you. God said, come on out. I want to show you something. Because right now you got to deal with identity. Come on out. He said, look up there. He said, can you count the stars? Abraham says, I can't count them. God says, so will it be with your offspring. They are beyond your ability to count. You will be the father of many nations. Watch it. See, Abraham, God says, your identity is not in your culture, because culture couldn't tell you that. It's not in your circumstances, because I know your physiology doesn't have the capacity to produce it. Come on. Actually, let me just press it a little bit. It's not even in your ethnicity, and it's not in your gender, because we like to hook our identities there, right? It's not in your political affiliation. A lot of us have our identity there. It's not in your class, how rich you are or how poor you are. A lot of us have our identity there. It's not whether you're gay or straight, because a lot of us have our identity there, right? It's not, no. If your identity hooks onto some of that, you're in trouble. God says, if you want to know who you are, don't ask mama. Don't look in the mirror. Ask me. Because I've got your identity. I know. And you don't have to prove nothing to me. I've given it to you. See, you be to do. And then he says, all right, now fast forward. Let's get to Romans. This is where I am. Because but as I get to Romans, let's stop by Jesus. Because when Jesus got ready to be baptized, watch it, he went to be baptized. And then you remember when he was baptized, he came out of the water and a dove landed on his shoulder, voice from heaven. Watch it. Here's what the voice says. This is my beloved son in whom, talking about identity, I am well what? But Jesus hadn't done nothing yet. He hadn't initiated ministry yet. See, it was the being and then to come to doing. But watch, Satan shows up in the temptation scene, right? When you go in the 40 days in the wilderness, right? Jesus goes 40 days in the wilderness. Luke catches this really well. And here's one of the three temptations Satan says to Jesus. He says to Jesus, listen, if you bow down and worship me, you can rule all of this. And he showed Jesus all the kingdoms and everything. He says, you can rule all this. See, he forgot that he's talking to Jesus, not Adam and Eve. And Jesus understood who he was, that he was the Son of the living God, that he was fully flesh, but he was also fully God, that he was already the ruler of all of that. Come on now. His identity was already established. I don't have to do nothing to get it. Just because you confused doesn't make me be confused. Just because your boss is confused, you don't have to be confused. Just because the girl you're in love with is confused, you don't have to be confused. Just because your children are teenagers, you know they always get confused there. You don't have to be confused. Who you are. This is one of the gifts that comes with being a follower of Jesus. You get an identity that's connected with Jesus, but it comes as a gift. Now, this is what Paul is trying to drive through all of his letters. Shout grace. Grace. So now we're back in Romans. See, last week I told you that peace is a part of the rhythm and that Jesus grants the peace. But then this week I'm telling you that you can't fully understand his peace until you get his grace. And that's what's going on in Romans chapter 5, verse 1, when he says, therefore, since we have been made right in the sight of God. Stop, underline in the sight. Everybody say in the sight. Not in my mama's sight. Not in the folk who remember what I did last night sight. No. In God's sight, we have been made right. Therefore, we have what? Peace. Because of what Jesus Christ has done for us. Now, let's back up a chapter. So Paul is going to explain how he got there. And that's where we started our reading. Listen, I love this. He's trying to explain this. Move quickly. Here it is. Here's what Paul says. Paul is talking to a performance-oriented community. He has Jewish believers who have become followers, but they're still shaped by their experience. And their experience says that we have to keep the law in order to be accepted by God. We have to prove by being perfect in our performance that we are worthy to be received. We have to earn God's favor through perfect performance. Paul is talking to that community. And so here's what he says. Listen how powerful it is. The note here, catch the underlining note. It's really about performance. They were saying we have to do to be. And then here's what he says. He says, listen, let's study Abraham. Abraham was, in human terms, the founder of our Jewish nation, he says. He said, now, what did Abraham discover about being made right with God? Being made right with God. Everybody say, being made right with God. He says, what did Abraham discover? And watch this here. He says, if his good deeds had made him acceptable to God, he would have had something to boast about. All right, come on, say this with me. If his good deeds, say it, had made him acceptable. Stop. If you're taking notes, I want you to write that down. If you have this, underline this, all right? Watch this. Let me translate it for you. If his good deeds had made him acceptable, if his good works had made him acceptable, if his good performance had made him acceptable, if he worked good enough to be acceptable, if he performed good enough to be acceptable, he would have had something to boast. All right, now let me put a pin right here, because this is an important point. When you are performing to be accepted, when you are performing to prove that you are worthy, when you are performing in order to acquire so that you can boast, that's due to be. And that drives us over the cliff. Now, let's be honest. A lot of us like how it feels to be due to be, because we like boasting. Here in Silicon Valley, it is really about, I want to be able to prove to you I'm better than you. I want to be able to prove to you that I'm the best. I mean, when we like comparing, I mean, you want all, your lady, well, everybody know I'm prettier than you. I want everybody to know I'm smarter than you. I want everybody to know I'm stronger than you. I want everybody to know my startup is going to be more profitable than yours. And I'm good at what I do. We like that. Come on, let's just be honest. Right? Here's the problem with it. Because the very thing that empowers us when we're boasting about success is the very thing that places us in bondage when we miss it. It's the very thing that locks us down and makes us feel like we're a failure when in fact I'm not as pretty as she, when in fact my company doesn't make as much as his, when in fact I didn't get the same level of education, because the same comparison that makes me feel better is the same comparison, because there's always somebody better. And I'm not perfect, and I may hold the record today, but I'm going to keep getting age. I'm going to lose it tomorrow. You'd be surprised at stuff I can't do at 50. Right. Now, here's the problem. Watch this. If you're a performance-driven person, you can get people to perform for you. If you're a boss, you can use fear to make people perform. The problem is it destroys relationships. And if you're performance-oriented at work, you're also performance-oriented at home. And you know what? It destroys relationships. You're driving your kids over the cliff. You're driving your husband over the cliff. You're driving your friends over the cliff because you're performance-oriented and you're destroying the relationship. This is why God says, I'm going to have a relationship with you that's not based on performance, because if it's based on performance, it's destroyed already. But I want to be able to hold on to the relationship with you even when you don't perform well. So it is by grace that I have a relationship with you. Shout grace. All right, let me tell you this story. It's a biblical story. It's the only way I can make sense out of it. Listen, here's a story. It's an odd story. It only makes sense in comparison across the biblical text. In 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 6 through 7, there's a story there. Here's how the story goes. The Philistines had captured the Ark of the Covenant and had kept it there. When David became king, he went to rescue the Ark of the Covenant. They put the Ark of the Covenant on a cart, as the law suggested, with the right poles and the oxen, and they're now taking the cart back to Jerusalem. The law says, under no circumstances do you touch the Ark of the Covenant. It represents the presence of God. They're walking along, and the ox stumbles. And when the ox stumbles, watch it, the ark shakes and begins to fall. And Uzzah, who's behind there, out of instinct, reaches to save the ark. And when he touches it, the text says that the anger of the Lord kindled and killed him. All right. I must confess, I've read this text for years. I just don't understand it. Because he's trying to help. But then, you got to get this. Come on, say do to be. All right, well, stay with me. You got to get this. Performance-oriented. What the text is teaching can only be discerned in the larger scope of the biblical text. Watch it. Here's what the teaching is. He broke the law. When there is no grace, when there is no margin, when there is no space to make mistakes, when there's no space, then you get the result of that text, which is destruction. And a lot of times we do it to ourselves. Destruction. Now, everybody say no space. There was no grace, no space, no grace. But then Jesus comes. And he takes our sins upon himself, according to Paul, the same guy's writing. And then when Jesus gets on the cross, here's how I describe it. I love it because, you know, they stretched his hands out, right? And the text says he became sin, not theoretically, conceptually, but in reality, he became sin for us that we might become, not theoretically, philosophically, or conceptually, but become the righteousness of God, even though I'm still drinking, even though I'm still lying, even though I'm still wallowing in the ditch. But if I believe, because Abraham believed and it was credited. Come on now. If I believe, here's what's happening. When Jesus did this, he started to open up space. We call it grace. And now there's room for me to trip and not be killed by my tripping. Tell somebody you can trip and not be killed by your tripping. Pun intended. All right, let me flip. So this is what Paul is talking about. So this is what he says, right? He says, so back to the passage of the Roman passage, he says, look, he says, the scripture says that Abraham believed what was told him. And God counted him as righteous. And then it goes on to say, if you earn your wages, that's not a gift. You earned it. He says, but people become righteous not by their works, not by their performance, but by their faith in a God who forgives sinners. Let's give God a hand praise. That's the good news. Hey! You know, I used to always get afraid when I preached this deal, right? Because I really feel like, oh my God, somebody's going to misunderstand this. And they're going to go just start sinning all over the place and say, you know, I can do it. I'm all right. I'm all saved. And Paul deals with this in chapter 6, verse 1. He says, now, what should we say to this, right? Because should you now sin even more so that God can show more and more of his wonderful grace? And then he says, of course not. You will obviously miss the point. The point is that God has declared you are righteous. That's who you are. Start acting like it. But I'm not going to hold you to a perfection standard. And I'm not going to say that your performance is the measure by which I'll stay in relationship with you. The relationship is a gift. Isn't that exciting? All right, I got to hurry and get through here. All right, let me give you my 3 points. All right, let me back into what we just did with Romans. Now let's go back to Matthew chapter 11. Now, here's fascinating. Jesus is talking to the same group of people in this passage. Performance-oriented people who, by keeping the law, is trying to be perfect in order to have a relationship with God. So here's what Jesus says to them. The NIV version translates it this way. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. There's some folk burdened in here today, right? Performance-oriented, burdened, and I will give you rest. Watch it. He then said, take my yoke. Stop. Now, to be honest, this is a confusing part of the text for me, generally speaking. For years, I said, read this. I said, here's my question. If you ask me to come so you can give me rest, how come in the same breath you're telling me take your yoke? Yoke is about what? That'll say like rest to me, right? Well, it depends on what kind of yoke it is. All right, here's the historical context of the agrarian situation that they found themselves in. In that day, what they would do is they would yoke two oxen together, tie them to a plier with a feller. But one of the ox would be a senior ox, an older ox, a mature ox, an ox that knew where to step, how to shift in order to carry the weight, knew the pace to go because he's plowed it before and he knows the length in which he's got to go and he knows how to preserve his energy. And so he's pacing. It's the older ox. And they will yoke a young ox to the older ox. And then the young ox, all he was supposed to do is just step where the older ox stepped. And when the older ox slowed down, the younger ox slowed. In other words, he was to just learn from the senior ox. Come on now. And the senior ox, he was always doing the heavy lifting, which made it possible for the younger ox. Come on, y'all ain't listening to me. And so because the senior ox knew where he was going, you know, he would stop and rest, and then he knew how to do it. And so by the time they got to the end, neither of them were wore out. All right, now let's go to the message presentation of the text, and now you get it, right? The message presentation of the text, here's what Jesus says. I love how here's what Jesus says. Listen, here's what he says. See, Jesus is the older ox in the text. And he says, take my yoke. What he said? Watch what he says. He says, are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion, performance-oriented religion? Gotta do. Are you burned out? He says, come to me. Implication, get yoked up with me. He says, get away with me. He says, and you'll recover your life. The other translation is, you'll find rest for your soul. Somebody in here needs rest for the souls. And then he says, watch me. I'll show you how to take rest, real rest. He says, walk with me, work with me. You hear the old ox talk, can't you? Come on. Watch how I do it. See, Jesus wants you to get yoked up with him in your daily work. Watch how I do it. See, that's why I'm giving you 3 times, 10 minutes. I'm trying to help you figure out how to get yoked up with him. Come on, watch how I do it. And watch it. And learn the unforced rhythms of grace. All right. How do I step into the unforced rhythms of grace? I love the way you ask your questions. Let me give you three things that you need to do right quick. Come on. It comes right out of the text, all right? How do I step into the unforced rhythms? Number one, there's 3 questions you need to ask when you find yourself strung out. Here's the first one. Who put the yoke on me, and what yoke is it? Take my yoke upon me. There is a difference between a performance-oriented yoke and a grace yoke. Let me tell you some examples. If you have a performance-oriented yoke, most likely you put it on you or somebody else's expectations did. And a performance-oriented yoke is the yoke that says, everything depends on me. There is no senior ox. So I've got to get it right with my kids perfectly or everything goes mess up. I got to get it right with my job. And by the way, if I've got 200 emails. I got to clear them all out before I go to bed because everything depends on me. If I got a to-do list, I got to clear it out because everything depends on me. I got to keep taking more and more assignments at work because everything depends on me in order to get that promotion. You see, it's performance-oriented. Y'all, that'll kill you. Grace-oriented looks like this. Watch it. My daughter and I had a conversation yesterday. She took a math test. She got a B. And the reason she's great in math, the reason she got a B was that she saw the problems on the front page. She finished them, checked it 4 or 5 times. But when she flipped it over about 5 minutes and found out there was more problems, she didn't know it towards the end. So she rushed through and filled them all out. Now, I'll show you how smart she is. If it was me, I had got an F. But she got a B. So she was telling I was applauding her, right? And then she said to me, she says, so Daddy, she says, when is it okay to get a B? And I didn't miss a beat. I said, sweetheart, if you do your best and get a B, you're okay. I said, as a matter of fact, if you do your best and get a C, it's okay. Now, for the performance-oriented people here, so, oh, no, are you kidding? Oh, no, you got to keep shooting at the A. You got to keep shooting. But that kind of performance kills your children, right? And it kills us. So I want to treat her the way God treats me. God says, Hurmon, give me your best. Come on now. And the gap between your best and what you need, I'll fill it with grace. The gap between a C and an A, grace. The gap between a B and a scholarship, grace. It means at 6 o'clock, I can say, you know what? I did my best. Close my computer. I'll see you tomorrow. The gap between today and tomorrow, grace. Come on, give God that and praise. That's beautiful. All right, let me finish these other 2 questions. I got to quickly. Secondly, you have to ask yourself, what's motivating you? For years, I was motivated by the folk who was around me when I grew up that said, you'll never be anybody. And for at least 15 years into my career as a pastor, I discovered one day that I was still trying to prove them wrong, and most of them were dead. Let me give you a different way of thinking about it. If you go to Romans chapter 12, the message presentation of that is simply this. He says, listen, guys, this is what I want you to do with God's help. He says, I want you to offer your life, sleep and eat and work and go around. I want you to offer all of that. I want you to make all of that an offering to God. Check this out. How would your life change? How would your work change if you would simply approach work as, you know what, I'm going to offer it as my worship? Well, what about your relationship? I'm going to offer my engagement in these relationships, whether it be friends or whatever, as worship. How would that change? That's a different kind of performance, right? Because nobody's judging your performance. At the end of the day, I want to bring, because in worship, you want to bring your best, right? But not so that I can prove anything, not so that I can get anything. I bring my best as a way of saying, thank you, God. Come on now. Thank you for giving me the job. Thank you for putting me here. Thank you for being my Lord, my Savior, for being my boss. I just want to worship you in the details of my work. And then lastly, you have to ask yourself the question, who am I trying to please? Let me just go ahead and give you the answer. If you know Jesus, the only person you ought to be trying to please is Jesus. Right. Watch this. Here's a good insight. Jesus is easier to please than some people you know. Because Jesus has grace. Please him. So the next time you find yourself something, here's your homework. I'm finished. Here's your homework. Go back this week. I want to give you the same homework I gave you last week. 10 minutes, morning, afternoon, and night. But this time, you understand what I'm trying to do. You're trying to open up space so that you can hear the rhythm of God. That you're in that space. You're reminded that work is worship, that life is worship. Come on now. And so that's where, don't beat yourself up. Don't remove the grace from that and say, oh, I missed it. Oh, my God, I'm going to hell. No. It's not about that. Just pick up where you left off. And see, can you get God and you inside the same pace? Come on, let's give God a hand praise. Come on, Pastor Dan. Here's the response I want to give you. If you will do what I've suggested, which is work those times, and when you find yourself in those times or strung out, I just want you to ask yourself those 3 questions. If you have to do it 2 or 3 times a week or 2 or 3 times a day, what yoke is it and who put it on me? What's my motivation here? And who am I trying to please? And if you're willing to do that, just simply say, I choose the yoke of grace this week. God bless you.